So we've talked about how a relationship between the mother and the child is interrupted by a third element, which kind of legalises that relationship. And I say legalises, I mean in the sense that it sets up laws. It sets up things that are allowed and things that are not allowed, places where desire can go, and limits beyond which it can't go. There's a subtler point to be made about law and desire as well, which is really that they are interdependent. They're two sides of the same coin. If something is forbidden, it's inherently desirable. And by desire, an absolutely kind of key word in psychoanalysis, but a rather broad one, I think. And I think by desire, Freud and Lacan both clearly mean, amongst other things, a desire for knowledge, a desire for a theory which will make sense of this random, indifferent world that we live in. And Freud writes about the theories that children come up with to answer a question which adults don't usually help them very much with, the question of where babies come from. And there are other questions that children have to ponder, other voids of non-understanding which they try to fill with answers. Who am I? Who am I in relation to my mother? What do my parents want from me? And also, what is this body of mine? Where and why does it bring pleasure? How does that pleasure, or how does the body compare to the bodies of other people around me? And how does the pleasure that I enjoy compare with the pleasure that my mother gets from her body? And it's that last question, how does the pleasure that I get from my body, how does that compare with the pleasure that my mother gets? It's that question which for Freud is the really, really unthinkable one. And it kind of leads us to this idea that sometimes the need for answers comes up against something that escapes knowledge, that escapes thought even, but is nonetheless experienced in some way. Can't be articulated, but it's experienced in some way. And that experience is usually deeply disturbing if it's not articulatable. It's usually deeply disturbing for the adult as well as the child. You could argue that the only reason I'm making these films is to find a theory which, like kind of wet concrete, can fill some sort of cryptic void. But that's all psychoanalysis is really, it's just wet concrete. And alongside this failure of knowledge is also a refusal of knowledge. So we all do this sometimes. We reject a theory or an idea which makes sense simply because we find it unbearable, or because it calls into question other theories that we hold dear. And Freud suggests one of the reasons why children's theories about sex run up short is that even when it's obvious that the woman does not have a penis, even when the existence of the vagina is evident, the child will reject this knowledge and continue to believe that the mother has a penis. So there's a fundamental opposition here between this enigmatic absence, which brings with it this terrifying feeling of loss, and the theory or the idea which, like the phallus, tries to reassure us by filling in that absence. And I think it's fair to say that psychoanalysis aligns femininity with the lack and masculinity with the attempt to fill the lack. And this alignment has been interpreted, particularly by some feminists, as being offensive, as being demeaning to women. And feminism has debated furiously and very fruitfully with psychoanalysis on this subject. I'm not necessarily quite sure what to make of that argument, but I do think any kind of argument that accuses analytic theory of reducing women to passive objects needs to reckon with two counter-arguments. The first one is that femininity and biological femaleness are not aligned, fundamentally not aligned. Men and women can both take up a feminine position. And secondly, being offended by an alignment of femininity with lack implies that lack and loss and absence are bad things, and that knowledge and satisfaction are good things. And I would ask, why should that be true? Surely if we demean that which is missing or lacking, we get caught in that phallic trap of believing that a complete, lackless, whole theory or worldview is possible. In other words, that symbolic castration can be avoided in some way. And I would argue that is a trap, a particular phallic masculine trap. So if we forget about biology for a moment, and we suggest, as psychoanalysis does, that taking a feminine position means throwing off any claim to completeness and acknowledging one's own lack, I would argue it's a potent position to take, because it means that we can unmask any theory that promises a world of unity and harmony. And to truly accept difference, I need to accept that someone may have something that I don't have, and that I may have something that they don't have. But none of us has it all. None of us has everything. So this has taken us seemingly a long way away from sexual difference, specifically sexual difference. But let's consider briefly what this masculine all versus feminine not all, what that difference might mean in terms of sexual pleasure, or to use Lacan's more precise term, jouissance. So the masculine phallic form of jouissance focuses on the penis. It focuses really on how splendid the penis is, how fabulous that it fits into the vagina and fills it so perfectly. And phallic jouissance is obsessed really with what organs do, and particularly what the penis does. And in focusing so much on organs, it avoids the otherness of the partner. It puts the sexual partner out of reach psychically. Whereas feminine jouissance aims at something beyond the phallus, beyond the penis, beyond sexual organs, at something more unknowable, unsayable, something more kind of intangible. And Lacan famously says there is no such thing as a sexual relationship, precisely because of the incompatibility of these two positions. If you like, the jouissance of the idiot versus the jouissance of the mystic. So the feminine position, taking the feminine position, is acknowledging a fundamental lack, and it's acknowledging the object which gives the illusion of temporarily filling that lack. But the feminine position is also to experience something beyond the phallus, something beyond the interlocking with the phallus. Whereas, paradoxically, what the masculine position lacks is that direct relation to lack itself. Men, or people who take a masculine position, which more likely to be men, they tend to be locked in an illusion, tend to be locked and trapped in this unrealizable dream that everything is possible. And that in turn leads to a very limited form of satisfaction.